Hello and welcome to the RC Industry Podcast. For those of you new to the show, I'm comedian Simon Caine, and this is the podcast where I interview the most influential people from the worlds of stand-up, comedy, radio, and today, theatre and the Edinburgh Fringe. Nica Burns OBE is a London theatre producer and co-owner of Nimax Theatre Group, comprising of The Palace, Lyric, Apollo, Duchess, and more. Beyond owning a lot of influential theatres, Nica is best known as the director and producer of the Edinburgh Comedy Awards since it started in 1984. These awards have launched the careers of comedians including Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Emma Thompson, Eddie Izzard, Jack Dee, and many, many more. There's a Wikipedia list of all of them if you actually want to look them all up, but essentially this is one of the most coveted awards at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for comedians. I had her on to talk about if there are too many awards, what the impact of an award has outside of the Edinburgh bubble, the gender split in the nominees, and much, much more. This podcast will be useful for anyone looking to take their debut show up to the Edinburgh Fringe, or anyone who is just interested in the behind the scenes of the most prestigious and coveted awards at the festival. Please do share this with anyone you think will get any value out of it. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. If you're old here, please do consider to give us an honest review in iTunes. But for now, this is Nica Burns.
We have sun in Edinburgh instead of rain. How long will that last? Who knows? Probably minutes.
Yeah, I'm sorry for wasting the 5 minutes of sun.
Yes, indeed.
Fringe. What I normally do is I ask the first question and I ask the guest to incorporate that in their answer, so I can do an introduction and then cut it to that. Okay. So the first question was just going to be, for this I'm going to presume everyone knows what the Edinburgh Awards are. Okay. So it means that we don't have to go into that too much. But I was going to ask, why did you start the awards, and is that still the same reason why they carry on now?
Well, two answers to that. In that, although I do tell people, I didn't actually start them.
Right.
So what happened? Here is the absolutely definitive story of what started out as the Perrier Awards, and they were indeed founded by Perrier in 1981. They were very smart because they picked up on the fact that something was happening in comedy, because of course 1981 was a massive year for comedy, because that is the official, inverted commas going on here, birth of the alternative comedy movement, though in fact it started 2 years earlier by Alexis Hale in 1979, and it suddenly became a proper movement in 1981 when all the comedy clubs started springing up, and I was there right at the beginning. However, so Perrier came up with this idea. They wanted to do an award at the Edinburgh Fringe. They came up and they talked to the then director of the Festival Fringe Society, Alistair Moffat, and he said, "Well, there's a Fringe Festival. There's nothing. Comedy's an up-and-coming thing," and that's how they decided to do a comedy award. And it was a most timely thing, and that was the year when, in 1981, the first year when Cambridge Footlights won, in the wonderful lineup, of course, which included Emma Thompson, Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Tony Slattery. I think Richard Ranch might have been playing the piano, Penny Dyer, and it was a very extraordinary time. And that happened for 3 years, and it was very small. And at the end of 3 years, which was the year that Los Trios from Barcus won, that was, the shortlists weren't published in those days officially. The panel, they didn't have a sort of comprehensive style that we do. The panel was sent to see shows basically by the person who was then running them, who was Lou Stein, out of the Gate and Latchmere Theatres, and the prize was £1,000 and a week's run in London. After the 1983 festival, I was now artistic director of the Donmar Warehouse in the old days when it was much fringier than it is today, but very same theatre. And I put on a act from Edinburgh, which I thought was fantastic, called Pookie Snackenberger, who had been shortlisted. Pookie Snackenberger became something quite iconic called Stomp. And that's where it started here in Edinburgh. And it was all the same thing. It was Luke Creswell and Steve Nichols, and they had the drums, and that was the year when they were trying it out. And Glynis Henderson, an Edinburgh promoter, picked it up, and he thought it looked wonderful. Chief Executive Perrier thought it looked fantastic on the Donmar, And he approached us and he said, love your theatre, would you like to take over our comedy awards? And I had a look at them and I went, no. Not really. He said, well, why? He's kind of a bit hurt. Why? I said, well, it's not a big enough vision behind them. And he said, well, all right, what would you like to do? So I had to think about it, and I came up with something that was much bigger. And I said, and I was working with Ian Albury, who was the person who owned the Don Mart at the time. And I said, right, you're going to have to spend a lot more money, far more than you're doing it now. It needs to be done in a very, very organised way. How you judge an award is important. I want it to be much more than a week and £1,000. We came up with this proposal, and at the time, nobody was doing what we decided to do, which is we wanted to recreate the fun of somewhere like the multi-sharing you get, like the Assembly Rooms queue in those early days. And so I said, I want to do a 3-week London season. We'll do 3 shows a day on some of the days. So we'll be able to take 9 shows. And that may sound very little now. It was radical at the time. It was exciting. It was really different. And it meant we could bring more people and showcase more talent. But we didn't do it just as comedy. We had 7, 9, 11 o'clock slots. And 7 o'clock we did a drama to get something that wouldn't come down, something radical. And then at 9, 11 we only did 11 o'clock slot on Fridays and Saturdays. Don Mart already was doing late night comedy, so that worked well with that. And to my surprise, and I asked for a lot of money, a lot more money and they said yes, they loved it. So actually, in a sense then, I rebirthed the awards, if you like, for 1984. After the 3 years, it was done in the old-fashioned way, and then in 1984 we had the much bigger thing and more money, and we called it, and we did the Perrier pick of the Fringe in London, and that was the first London to Edinburgh season to bed in, because at that time people just weren't doing it, and it was a massive success. And we had got together a set of very careful rules which guaranteed a number of things, and the most important thing was that every single act that was eligible, and the eligibility is kept simple, every single act would be seen and judged. And we have a very democratic system. It's run so that it's very, very transparent, and that's important. The judging panel judge it. They have no influence brought upon them by a sponsor or by ourselves. It is a real thing. And I think that's one of the reasons actually why they've been so successful, because people trust them to be exactly that, thorough, independent, emulating what Edinburgh Festival Fringe is, which is open access to all. Mm. So we don't care where the venue is, we don't care if it's someone's, we welcome first timers, obviously. We see everybody, and everyone is treated equally, and that is the founding nature of it. So if you, in a sense, I refounded them in 1984, and they've been developed since, and they've grown as the comedy industry itself has changed. Because you'll laugh now, because I can tell you that in the early days, I personally saw every single show that was eligible. And then, because it's like the first year, 1984, there was only about 45 shows eligible. I can't remember the exact amount. So it was easy. And of course, there are a lot of late night shows then. I mean, that's the great thing, I think, now, is that comedy's been able to come in earlier, because a lot of shows, the venues at that time were putting comedy on at midnight. And there were very few professionals. You were going through a lot of comedy reviews. Mm-hmm. And the standard now, overall, festival is just in a different league. I mean, there are always some good people, but overall, comedy standard is pretty good, I think.
How have you then managed to develop a system to cope with, because the festival is just expanding every year. I was told this year there's 300 more comedy shows versus last year, because it's the 70th year.
Well, we have 700 shows eligible this year.
Right.
And we had to make some pretty big changes. And of course, along the way, there have been 2 additional awards. Mm-hmm. And the Best Newcomer was founded in 1992 during the festival. Right. And it was founded because actually of one particular act. And that particular act was panel went to see, and we got the first judge to come back saying, this guy's a genius. The act's all over the place because it's his first time, but he's really special. And that was, of course, the winner that year, which was Harry Hill. And he just clearly, funny bones, real deal. But they said, we're looking at the show as a whole, and we had Steve Coogan win that year, and we're Joe Brand. It's not. The show itself has got lots of things that could just be done tighter, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, I looked at it and thought, things have developed a lot further now. We now have something which a much bigger, proper professional comedy scene, because the clubs were critical to the growth of live comedy in this country because they had somewhere to go and play. And I remember back in 1983, when actually I was working with him in a play, you'll laugh, but one of the godfathers of alternative comedy, John Dowie, would say that it took 10 years to learn to become a comic because you couldn't get many gigs. You were lucky, you were lucky to get a certain amount of gigs a year. By the time we got to 1992, that long, the teaching process for a comedian, because as a comedian, the audience teaches you to be better. Every night, every line that comes out of your mouth is judged by laughter or no laughter or silence or that right kind of listening silence. You can tell exactly how your material is going down, can't you?
Yeah.
And also, you start making that connection, which is, why I am so admiring as someone who is very well-known theatre producer. I just respect comedians so much because, for me, they go beyond most artists. They have to write the material. They've got no other person's words to hide behind. If you're in a play and not going by, go bloody script. Can't do that with comedy. Your script. Yeah. You then have to really find who your inner performer is, and that doesn't. With some people, it is just themselves. Most people, it's an extension of themselves. With other comedians, it's a total character. So, but that doesn't come instantly. For those that are doing it themselves, it starts from the beginning, but they then find a way to develop that a little bit more when you're being looked at under lights on a stage and a whole room is staring at you. And then, of course, you find out about the most important thing of all, which is, of course, timing. Yeah. And how long do you keep that pause? How do you land it? You learn about that fantastic thing about buttoning off a gag, and that sometimes if you just change the order of the words, you get a better laugh. Yeah. And you learn about structuring your act, and, of course, the pickups. All the times at the beginning when you just tease in a theme, tease in a moment, and suddenly a bit later you bring it in and the audience goes, oh, that's hilarious, oh my God, they get it, they know what you're talking about, and you get a much bigger laugh. And you learn it on the job, most of all. You can spend your hours sweating, writing your show as you all do, but the proof is, proof of whether it works is when you're standing up there. And the clubs are essential. And for those that don't stay in live work, they will take away the comedy writing and delivery knowledge that they've learnt hard and put it to very good use. That's their training. That's their university of how to write and perform comedy. And Edinburgh is the daddy, it's the Oxbridge of them all,
Boot camp.
Boot camp, yeah, is that what you put? Of course, that's a good word for it.
Yeah. Well, so say you go and see a show that you're going to be judging or you're going to be putting forward for an award, and it's a bad day for that performer. So the audience have come in, maybe it's a drunk Saturday night in Edinburgh, or it's anything that just throws it off. How do you take that into account then? Well,
I think we have a very experienced panel, and it's essential. It's absolutely essential. And one of the keys to having a good award is who is judging it. It's really important, and we really think about it. And you'll have been in an audience, I've been in an audience, and you can tell, if you've got a disruptive audience, you absolutely take that into consideration. But you can still hear good material if it comes through. And there are times when someone's written the note on the show or rung up and said, look, I went to X last night. She had a terrible audience. It was one disruptive person, wrecked it for everybody, dealt with it very well, could see they were thrown, but there were some really good bits. We need to go another night. So we do take that into consideration. Long answer to what was very 2 words really. Yes, we take that into consideration.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously 2013 was when the first Free Fringe show actually won an award.
Yes, but they had been nominated going back. I think Mike Weitzenhoffer was nominated back on the Free Fringe ages ago. So we've always come to the Free Fringe. And we did give Peter Buckley-Hill an award, not so, actually quite reasonably early after its foundation for actually founding it, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that you guys don't go to the Free
No,
Fringe.
Tell everybody, we have always gone to Free Fringe shows. It's really how they could read the rules. They're on the website. They're really clear. We do not care where you perform. We do not care what you are charging. We do not care if you have no set. You certainly don't have to have any technology whatsoever. We will come and see you wherever you are. So please, as long as what you do have to do is be running the right dates, because if you you can't come and do 3 dates in the last week, because we can't get the panel around in that time. It's practical. And if you cancel on the day because you don't feel like it, there wasn't enough audience, you've cancelled. We're not going to guarantee to come back. If you're sick and someone rings up and tells us, then we accept that. And you do have to be doing a minimal length. And you'll know why, and that is because it's much, much easier to do a great 20 minutes than it is to do what I call the Edinburgh hour, which does occur to me that it is the same hour as the psychiatrist hour, which is 50 minutes.
Exactly.
Because you have to be coming out. And I just thought the other day, that is sort of quite amusing, particularly with, the pressure that comedians have and also where they've come from, that there's been so much discussion about comedians and mental health.
Yeah.
And there's a much bigger, we could have a whole day conference on that. It's a very, very special job, and it's a very special person that feels that needs to and wants to do that job. And it's hard, and I get it.
So I was only laughing because the second joke in my show is about how comedy is really good therapy, but only for someone who can't afford a therapist and doesn't want to get any better.
Well, that's good. That anyone doesn't get any better is good. So I have a laugh at that.
Thank you very much. No, but I know what you mean. It's kind of weird that because I noticed that more performers now want to tour hours than do club sets. A lot of my friends who get onto the club circuit feel like they get trapped into that because it's very much a cyclical cycle, especially throughout the year. So I feel like there's been this sort of, I don't want to say backlash, but there's been this change and a trend in performers trying to work towards an hour to tour because it's A, they get more stage time, B, they have the audience that are coming for them rather than coming for a club or like just for anyone who's turning up and stuff. Do you think the awards had an impact on the wider scope of comedy for people to try and build hours rather than build club sets?
I think, well, first of all, I think comedians strive all the time, but I think the awards have helped. I wouldn't ever take the credit for absolutely anything at all, but I think that there were only a very few comedians were coming up to do an hour. The venues weren't giving them space. What the awards did was to focus on comedy as a genre. It assisted the press to get more involved because there was a story and there was a hook for them. And I think that, well, I'm pretty certain that the awards have been a great contributor to getting more attention to comedy as a genre. And what we do is we put a really big spotlight here on comedy. And it makes me so cross that I still feel this very passionately, that comedy is not given, in my view, the status that other genres of entertainment get. Theatre, dance, music, opera, and more higher opera singing and forms of opera and ballets, and I think it should. And in fact, this very year, a very senior journalist told me that, if space was tight on a paper, the first thing that the editor cut was comedy space and put other reviews instead. Yeah, and that's so. I think that we take our role in putting the spotlight on comedy very seriously. We work at it. It doesn't come out of nowhere. But the awards give a great story. You come and there's so many acts. It's very difficult, whether you're a journalist or a public, to actually see your way through it, because you do want to read all the blurbs, and everyone's trying to go to something that they think they're going to enjoy. If it's a risk, they think they're going to enjoy it before they go.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that comedy starts to get a bigger buzz around it, and that by talking about it in print publicly and on the radio and everywhere else, it helped make it seem more, I think it helped grow the audiences, but it also made it more worthwhile for a comedian to come up. And then they realised how important it was, because that here you could actually improve your craft in a way you can do nowhere else. I mean, you must be finding this while you're here, that you have 3 weeks in exactly the same space. So you know your space before you go in, you know how it works, you know how your sound system works, you know the distance between yourself and the front row, all those things that you suss out that you can work with when you know what you've got more easily. You don't have to do just sussing out the venue moment, when you go into a club that you haven't been to for a while. And you can actually take the moments and start rewriting your show as the audience tells you whether you've got it or not. Have you made changes to your show while you've been here?
Yeah, quite a few.
Yeah, quite a few, because they tell you. But it's having that continuity, isn't it? Doing it night after night after night with an audience that's listening.
Well, this is the thing. So in July, I did 19 previews in the whole of the month, and I did that over 2 different venues that I knew very well, specifically as like a run-through to get ready for this. But then I hear things like, we were talking about Stuart Lee before not about this, but we were talking about Stuart Lee before we got on, and he says things like, back in the 1980s, he used to come up with an idea and you could perfect it over the month, and there was no pressure because there was only about 10 of us, and it was a whole different ball game. And I kind of find sometimes, I have little lines that I can change each night because they're fun to do for me and whatever, but I find that I kind of want it to be as polished as I can be when I get it up here, because there are judging panels up here, because there are industry walking around all the time. So do you find that you want there to be a polished, like you want it to look like it's literally, I can put that in this theatre, I can put that in this venue?
No.
Or do you want it to be like a moment, you want it to be like an experience?
We just want it to be a great show, and some people's shows are part of it is a kind of roughness. You've got, I think that by the time you've got towards the end of the festival, you should have got better.
Yeah. You'd hope.
Because sometimes I see someone right at the beginning and I see them right at the end, and you go, yeah, look what he's learned or she's learned. Look what they've learned here. That is the point of it. Yeah. And I know, because I did it myself. And 1983, my little theatre company, we brought up our play, but we also did a review which was called a little comedy for Bertolt Brecht. So it was a joke, theatrically. But the cast was myself, Mark Steele, and an Australian comedian called George Nobody. Right. And it was part of that whole, we were experimenting. We worked with comedians from very early days. And the play that Colin Watkins, who went on to work with Ken Campbell, we wrote was called Play Strindberg, but Strindberg was played by John Dowie. Right. And the previous year, I'd come up with the play the first time in 1982 as a young actress, where I just wanted to turn this novella into a play, which I sent it to a guy I was at university with, who I was his leading lady. He directed the shows, Colin Watkins, and we brought it to Edinburgh, and it went on the Celtic Lodge, and it was a huge hit, and it changed my life. Yeah. And we got into, in that year we were doing the play Dulcimer at the Finborough Arms, and we did late night comedy, and then stayed on and did late night comedy, Alternative Comedy Club on Fridays and Saturdays. And all our guest acts, that was my generation, were at the time. There's Jeremy Hardy. I just bumped into Roy Bremner this week, and he said, she gave me my first gig ever. I was the guest spot at the Edinburgh Arms upstairs, and I used to compare because we couldn't afford a compare, and so I did it, and it was small, and I learnt, and I would stand at the door every day, and I would say hello to every single member of the audience. So later on, I could go, if someone heckled, I could go, oh, there you go, that's what an accountant does for you. That's an accountant's idea of a funny heckle. Whoa, you know. And I'm not pretending to be a comedian at all.
No.
But with comparing, you can do it in that.
Yeah, of course.
You get to know the audience, you got rapport with them, and you talk to them.
Yeah, definitely.
And I watched them all hone their acts, and then became in 1983. Dilly Caine asked me to go and direct Fascinating Ida, which of course is a comedy troupe, an all-girl female comedy song troupe. So,
well, what you were saying before, you said that comedy is the first thing to be cut from like arts and stuff. Do you think it comes back to the jester thing? Like the jester was always the low end of the entertainment.
I was thinking about that. I think that's a very good way of putting it. And also jester was low end of entertainment. I was asking myself the question: is it because it's populist? You know, is there something? I mean, now it's a massive strand of entertainment, and it's actually just going back to what it used to be like, because comedy, the British have always loved comedy. We had all over the UK were the great big empires, which were lots of variety halls, and we used to have variety vaudeville everywhere. And then what happened was they sort of died pretty much after World War II. It had a stagger, and after the war came back, people wanted to laugh, laughter was there, and then television happened. And television basically killed off vaudeville and variety, because you could now sit as a family and watch Sunday night at London Palladium with the very best variety acts of everywhere on TV, and you would go home, but we didn't get TV sets all over the place until the 1960s. And there was that gap, and then alternative comedy came along in 1979 as it was very political. People forget why. You know, winter discontent, when there were strikes everywhere. Maggie Thatcher was then elected out of that, and there were a lot of young people standing up going, we want change, we don't want this. And Alexis Hale and his band of merry men, including Tony Allen, and they decided that they didn't approve of the old-fashioned style comedy, and they put new rules in place, in a sense, or a basis of people who wanted to do comedy in the same way, and that was the no sexist, no racist, no homophobic jokes. And you look back and you go, actually, it's incredible, because a comedy movement of young people in their 20s actually knocked all the old-fashioned comics off stages and off the TV schedules in quite a short space of time. How exciting was that? So, and there's still, so then we've got comedy back to where it had always been, actually. And there's a very famous playwright called J.B. Priestley, and he was northern working class, and in his early days he was actually a critic for, I think it was called the Bolton Bugler or something like that. And he wrote then, this is right back, late in the 1920s, he said, why is it I can go and see a really great play to find that it's half empty, but you go down road and you get the variety hall packed. It's packed, and that's because people want to go and laugh, and we're back.
Yeah. Well, this is the interesting thing, is like when that movement happened, I feel like TV was a lot more experimental and a lot more able to adjust to trends that were happening outside of TV. Whereas now, I think even recently they had that BBC, I can't remember what it was called, but they had it's like a census, and loads of people said, we want you to be more experimental. You're doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And so it feels very much like, and I understand why, because with the internet, there's a lot more potential for media that people can put their time into rather than TV, and so I imagine there's a lot of not risk-taking in terms of commissioning because you just want to know that there'll be eyeballs.
Yeah, so they just want to get the ratings. They
Exactly.
want to fill the house like we do too.
Exactly, and I can imagine that even though there is a different trend happening on the live circuit, you can see the disconnect, because I go to live a lot more than I watch TV comedy. There's a massive disconnect between what happens live and what happens on TV. And I wondered how that is now affecting in your award, because obviously you're looking at live, you're not looking for TV as such, but there are TV people on panels. So I'm wondering how much that's influencing their decisions.
Yes. So let's just talk about the panels. I'll pick up. So one of the interesting you said was that you thought TV before Alternative Comedy was born was more experimental, and I have to say, yeah, actually. But it came out of a change, something happening on the live side, and where there was a moment which changed it, and that moment was here. Go back to Edinburgh again, finding radical, having an upheaval moment in comedy, and that was 1960 when Beyond the Fringe happened here, and that I find that story incredible because it was 4 performers who've never actually worked together as a team put together. We'd all go, oh yeah, that won't work, wouldn't we? Because being a team in comedy such as so big, it was a sort of One Direction moment which succeeded. Because the then artistic director of the Edinburgh International Festival put Jonathan Miller, Alan Bennett, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, who had never worked together before. And they clicked, and then Beyond the Fringe happened and went to London, went to New York. And out of that came the big change in satirical television. That's how that was the week that was. And all the shows that followed. So here we go. We go back to live comedy in Edinburgh to be something that changed television, just as live comedy coming out of the clubs with the alternative comedy movement changed the TV schedules. So we do have television people on the panel, but they are wanting to see, they are totally open to anything that is different and experimental. And that I suppose comes back to the balance of the panel, doesn't it? How do you choose the judges? Because that, of course, is critical to the results that come through. So it's quite structured. We always have 7 professionals and 3 members of the public. And the 3 members of the public are comedy fans who really know their stuff and who pay to watch comedy all the time. And I think that payment bit is important because they're very aware what they think is a value for money ticket. And they write, the competition's difficult. They have to write 3 reviews of comedians that they particularly have enjoyed in the past year and why they should be on the panel, and then they're interviewed. And I have to say is that their comedy knowledge is extraordinary. These are people who go to clubs 2 to 3 times a week, and for those that live in a small place, they just try and grab as much as comedy as possible, and they can't perhaps see as much, but they've built it up, and they come here and they spend their precious money on their summer holiday coming to the Fringe and doing as many shows as they can afford, plus lots of shows on the Free Fringe, and they're brilliant, and they also come with this different point of view. Then we have someone from the live world. We've got Jeff Rowe from Leicester this year.
Love him, he's great.
He's great,
yeah.
Really knows his stuff.
Yeah.
And then we have a mix of journalists, comedy critics. So our chair this year is Helen Hawkins from the Sunday Times. And we've for the first time put Mark Boozy from British Comedy Guide, because obviously he knows really his stuff, and we want that. Everyone needs internet reviews now, or to interview space. He doesn't review per se. And Mark Wareham, who's the Mail on Sunday. So, and then we have someone from BBC Comedy Radio, because we know how important that is. That is a next step coming out of Edinburgh for many people. And then we have a couple of television people who are looking for comedy. And they're not seeing a show and judging it on, can I use this for television? Sometimes they see a show and go, I've got an idea to put them on television, which is what I think the comedian might like to hear.
Not everyone.
Not everyone, but you know.
Well, quite a lot of them. Yeah.
But it's like anything else. Everyone likes to be asked.
Yes, I'd like to be asked to the party.
You can be asked and you can choose to say no. But if you're not asked, you don't like that either.
Yeah.
You know, you want, success means performer choice.
Yes.
And that's where you're trying to go. And then if you know, I so admire Daniel Kitson because he does exactly what he likes and on exactly his terms, when and how he likes to do it. I love that. That's what we're all looking for as performers. That's what I wanted as an actress, was to be able to choose my parts and who I might be able to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
And, you know, I found as an actress that I was quite successful and I worked all the time doing good parts, but you're always at the bottom end of the decision-making rule. Now, the comedians, you make all the decisions in terms of your work, but you still need to get invitations in terms of taking your work further. Yeah. And someone else to say, yes, let's go with it.
That's, aside from his talent and skill, is what I admire about Kitson, is the fact that he has been so... I mean, obviously not for his whole career, he's had agents and he's had people backing him, but more recently he's had so much control over everything he's doing that for me that's the admiration part.
But of course, right at the beginning, you don't know exactly what you want totally. Even someone like Daniel, he was, you know, standing up, learning his craft. And I still remember the night that he won. He wrote, he said he made a very funny speech about how he wasn't there at the when he accepted it, and then he went down to Late and Live in the old Girls and Balloon, you know, day. Went down Late and Live. He absolutely stormed it, and he waved his award as, I was the one that won, you know. Nice. It was a legendary night for those that were lucky enough to be there.
Yeah. That's Edinburgh, isn't it? Like you see stuff that will never happen again, and it's amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, with the proliferation of comedy shows, there's actually been a lot more awards that have sprung up and have started. Do you think there are too many awards now?
I'm thinking about that question. We've had a lot of awards that have come and gone. The awards that matter are the awards that stay, because it's continuity and seriousness is what does it. I remember we had, was it the Polo Award, People's Choice Award at one point, which sort of threw a lot of, caused a bit of a fuss, but didn't last for very long. That I think awards are good in the sense that they give someone some attention. They give people a sense of achievement and encouragement, and that's good. I think they are overall a good thing, but I know that people go, well, one award is nice, but they still have to get up and go and name it the next day. I've been up for lots of awards in my theatre life. I think getting nominated is the most important thing, because that tells you this kind of standard that you've achieved that year, and tells the audience that. And then after that, you know, after nomination, who wins can be a matter of personal funny bone, and there's never going to be. There's always going to be personal choice, isn't there, about what you particularly find funny. I call it the golden year because every nominee was so extraordinary and so different, and that was, of course, the 1991 when we had Eddie Izzard, Frank Skinner, Lily Savage, Paul O'Grady's Lily Savage, Jack Dee, and Avner the Eccentric on the shortlist. And I remember sitting through the shows twice and going, who would I vote for? They're all bloody brilliant. They are fantastic and totally different. And it was and the same with the panel, 5-hour debate, 5 hours to get to result. All of them spectacular, and all of them went on to be mega, mega successful and also influencers. And, you know, that's that last bit. It's like really hard, isn't it? You look and go, who would I actually vote for? You know, it's hard. And that's how it should be.
Yeah, but there's that whole I can't remember who said it, but it was that thing. If you analyse a joke too much, it's like dissecting a frog. You know, you learn how it's funny, but the frog dies essentially. And I wondered whether you think that you can analyse a comedy show too much.
Well, I think you can certainly analyse the main criteria, which is, can the person write? Are they a good performer? Those are the two, performance and writing, isn't it? At the end of the day, those are the two big things. If you start to analyse every single bit of the material, I think you drive yourself mad. And I actually also think you have to remember that you are sitting there as a member of the audience, and that the audience will talk about it, that not going to dissect it to bits. Dissecting to bits is the bigger conversation in what should they work on to get better. So, take a tennis player, Andy Murray, brilliant tennis player, and you hear the commentators going, "Oh, I've got to work a bit more on that forehand. Oh, he's fixed his forehand. I just think that lob spin," and that's what we're getting into there. And I don't think that's. I think that goes too far when you're seeing a load of performances and you're actually analysing how great they are. Because that's what we're talking about, is how great is this show.
But are you also looking at where they could go with that act and that show, or are you just looking at that show for that moment?
We're looking at the show for what it stands for here.
Okay.
And we've taken people have won, like last year. Richard Gadd won, doing a very particular, extraordinary show. Is that going to become is he written it to become a massive TV series? No, he hasn't. Has he written, can he dissect it and easily do it in clubs? Is he going to want to do that? No, he needs to do his hour show as it stands. And we're all very grateful. We're lucky, actually, we have Soho Theatre in London, where people can do, we have Leicester Square Theatre, we have now more places where a comedian who is not super famous to be able to go and do their hour shows. And you were talking about that earlier, how important that is for comic and how much harder it is out of Edinburgh. Yes, it is. And there's two elements, isn't there? A comedian has to earn a living, and you work hard to get your 20-minute or 30-minute, if you're the headliner, club set, and to work to be the headliner. And you need to go and pay your rent, your mortgage like anyone else, and your travel and your expenses. So you work the clubs, and that's a good thing to do, and it's your bread and butter of your job. But you are aspiring at the same time to develop your work and get to your hour, and then getting to an hour where you could just do that because you are the headliner now, and you can do it. And I think there's this complete route now for comedians that didn't used to be there, where they can really grow their work if they're good enough. And at the end of the day, there are comedians who have managed to become worldwide stars without TV, and Eddie Izzard is the big one, because he always chose, he did very little television, he chose not to. He grew his live work and went on to film, can play arenas. He just did a run at one of my big theatre, the Palace Theatre, completely sold out. And that's exciting too. So that you have options now, guys and girls. It's great.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about sort of the transferring from London, from Edinburgh to London. And before we go into that, actually, because I find a lot of stuff in Edinburgh happens in sort of a bubble and sort of a microcosm of what's happening in Edinburgh. And there's a lot of debate as to how much an award means outside of Edinburgh and how much a review sort of carries you outside of Edinburgh realistically. How much do you think, as a producer in the West End, how much do you think an award, particularly yours, but
talking about mine, it was once summed up very well, I think, by Jonathan Thoday at Avalon, who said the great thing is that what you do is you dump £1 million worth of publicity on my act, and we get a lot of attention is able to be got for those. For the shortlist, and then of course the winner, and that's where we really try and promote the shortlist so it spreads, and you get national reviews, and people love that for their posters and for their blurb, and that helps to get more people, because what are you trying to do? Widen your audience. And I still remember when, in fact, Lily Savage, Paul Gray's Lizard, got nominated, and we brought them to London, and Don Moore was closed at the time, so we were at the Purcell Room on the South Bank Centre. And Paul at that time was mostly playing the gay circuit, and he was at the Purcell Room. He was getting couples and or just a normal comedy audience, and they loved him. And he got nominated. It really, doing Edinburgh, getting the attention of a nomination changed his whole audience, and very quickly Lily Savage became just a much loved comedy character, and it came out of a niche audience. I've first seen him at the Vauxhall Tavern you know, as Lee Savage loved him. I thought this guy is just a proper vaudeville comedy act. He's a genius.
Yeah.
And, you know, he had to be persuaded to come to Edinburgh, and Brendan, his manager, persuaded him to, and Edinburgh and his nomination changed the lot. And that was so exciting. And that is, winning an award just simply, getting nominated brings brings the act to the attention of a lot more audiences who otherwise might not come. And sometimes, you know, and we've been putting them on in London, they've come because they've got nomination, they've booked for everybody, and there's some people they don't like. And that's the way it is, folks. That's the way it is, folks. Yeah. You know, you don't know, but at least they're trying, and that's what we're always trying to do, is to widen our audiences, get more and more people to see us, and more different people to see us. Because comics dream to play to a completely mixed audience of age and sex and diversity, isn't it? That's what you want. Everyone.
Completely.
Access to everybody, not just be in a little corner somewhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was talking to Aditi Mittal, who's she was one of the first female comedians in India, and she came over here last year for the first time and commented on how white the festival is, essentially, and how it's a completely different audience to what she's used to playing to. And so for me, it's quite interesting, sort of, the more since I've done that interview and been up here, I've noticed that in terms of my audiences and the people who are coming. And I do want more diversity in my audience, and I do want, because otherwise I feel like sometimes I can run the risk of saying something that would work to a white audience, but might not work to a certain other type of audience, because we kind of have a shared opinion, and we have a shared. So I've got to be careful what I say.
We have to be careful. But we are all. Everyone's talking about their own experience.
Yes.
And when you come from different cultures, different families, it's a different experience.
Of course.
And that's all there is to it. And sometimes not everyone understands your experience. And then if you have an audience that mostly don't understand what you're talking about, you're not going to get laughs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think on that, you know, I was sort of looking at it, and I looked up the population base of the UK, which was a very good start, actually. I wished I'd done it before. Because London, where I live, is a bubble of its own. I don't know, should I make you guess what the population base of the UK is? Would you like to do that?
I don't think I'd be able to even hit
Everyone gets it wrong.
Okay.
I got it wrong. But and that is, how they do it is that white, Anglo-Saxon, everybody else. So everybody else is mixed in together. Right. That's what, and it comes from the census originally, but at the moment the official, inverted commas, and there's somewhere in the Guardian that reflects this too, is that roughly it's 15% BAME and 85% white, and in London it's 60-40.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. 60%
white and 40% BAME. Those are the figures that, if you go on the net and look officially, come up. So it's hardly surprising that if you apply the 15% equation, that it will be a lot whiter. That's just the way kind of it is today, and it's changed because it used to be, you know, 99% white, and is changing our society, and will carry on changing. Who knows what it'll be like in a few years' time? But that's diverse. Also has to. It's happening now because we've got people who were in their 40s when the alternative comedy boom started, and now obviously 30 years older. And I'm delighted to see how, since when I was standing up at the Edinburgh Arms comparing an audience in 1983, how different a comedy audience is, and it's really representative of the population. I think that's great. And when you look who's on stage, that's great. Because again, you know, when I started, when I saw all the shows eligible in 1984, there were hardly any women. And I'm glad now that women are not such an unusual. There are women are coming through. They're great. They're doing a good job. And yes, the question of, are women funny? Dead, boys and girls. Dead as a concept.
Well, this is the thing, is I'd love to agree that it is dead. I agree. I personally agree that it is.
As a concept.
Yeah, but there are still people out there that still do that thing where they go, it's a woman on stage. I'm not going to give them the 10 seconds I'd give a man to do a joke.
Shame on them.
I know, it drives me insane as well. We were actually talking about this just before we started.
Shame on them.
You've got the numbers. You brought the numbers.
I have got the numbers. Yeah, no, I have got the numbers. We are very statisticed up, and It was a slow burn. It took time, and it needed women to see other women doing it. We only ever had a few. And, you know, it was so great that in the early days we had, who did both live and television, two geniuses in Victoria Wood on the one hand and the double act of French and Saunders on the other. What great role models. Couldn't have been more different as women either. And you know, obviously Emma Thompson in the group of the first winning in the first group, but it was a long time. You know, you think 1995 for the first solo woman in Jenny Eclair. It was a long wait, and it's interesting how it was a slow burn, and now it's really accelerated, where you know, women are choosing comedy as thinking, yeah, I can do comedy as a career. But the other good news is there's quite a lot of women around comedy. Not everyone's a performer. And people often say to me, oh yeah, what happened to Laura Solon then? You know, won in 2005. It took another 10 years to get another woman. Well, she decided that she was much happier writing than performing. And she's in LA now, being extremely successful in comedy, but as a writer, and actually writes proper Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
And if people forget Alice Lowe, who I love, who was in Garth Marenghi when they won a few years ago. And I still remember Matthew Holness going, I could not find anyone who can play a camel as well as Alice. But she's now writing and directing films too. She's really, you know, expanded, and lots of comedy producers.
I when I first started this podcast, I got a little bit of, I wouldn't say backlash, but I got a few comments from people, because first episode was a woman, it was Hills Jager, and then I had 3 or 4 episodes that came out and they were men, and I had people going, well, that's not equal, is it? You're not keeping the balance. And I went, well, no, but wait a minute, and there'll be more women in it. And the more I've done it, the more I've realised, so agents, it's about 50-50 gender-wise. Promotion-wise, it's probably 60-40 in my experience, as in like club stuff. PR, it's a little bit more female-orientated than male. And it's kind of like you can't base it on a split like that, because it's just where they want to work. It's not you know.
I mean, I walk into big West End marketing meetings, and it's practically entire female team now, because that's where they're choosing. They're choosing to work.
I think the problem comes out is if we say they're not funny, that's why we're not booking them. Yeah. That's our problem. But if they don't want to, like you said, if she wins an award and then goes and does writing, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also I think with stand-up too, is that that's a starting point for a lot of people, and they do it, and then actually they suddenly discover that there's a different place that they are happier in comedy. Let me take someone who I'm a great fan of, David Walliams. Now, David did actually do live work, and did actually start live and did Edinburgh, and he and Matt was scooped up by Fanny Moore, a female producer, and together they made Little Britain, and then they found their whole TV personas, and now here's David Walliams. You know, as I said earlier, that 2 weeks ago I was in the foyer of the Garrick Theatre, and it was a press opening night show, main West End show. A whole group of the audience refused to take their seats. They stood in the foyer. They would not move, because they knew that the author of the book the show was placed on was coming. They were not going to move until they'd seen him. And all I can say is, you try telling a load of 7 to 11-year-olds to move. When David Walliams walked in the foyer, they just, faces lit up. They all brought Gangster Granny. When he came on at the end of the stage, they were shouting and whooping for him. And here he is now. He's major. He's one of the biggest children's authors in this country. He sold over 1 million books. They love him. And he was brilliant. He waited. He took at the end, when he came on at the end, a little boy ran up the stage, said, I want a picture. He stood, took the picture, and then of course he had to come off the stage and take a lot more pictures of the kids. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, is how, you know, that the work experience you get doing live stand-up is such that you learn so much so quickly. Some people go on to lots of other areas. They push their skills. Julian Clare is writing children's books. Jenny Clare writes extremely good novels now. And the day a few years ago I saw her actually on the Sunday Times best-selling list. I texted her and said, "You're on the best-selling list." I know! It's so exciting. So it's quite extraordinary, really, that there are just other routes, and some people just don't return back to their life roots.
No, of course. And I was going to say, I mean, I know you won't take credit for anything to do with the award because you've always said I won't do that. But how do you think when the first female sort of won an award, do you think that had an impact to make people go?
I do.
Yeah.
But also, I remember I witnessed it, because when I was running the Donmar, we used to do late night comedy Fridays and Saturdays, and comparing them myself at the Finborough, I watched how when a woman came on, the audience collectively folded their arms. And that was the women in the audience too. Girls, we can't get out of that. Going, oh yeah, show us. And in the early days, they'll tell you the early comedians the amount of show us your tits. And they had to learn to deal with that. And they just do, and they still do today from time to time. But I think it's fun. It's just a few people. And to be honest, I'd say to all the ladies listening to this, let's not the pricks put their problems onto us.
That's what they do.
It's their problem. But we don't have the debate. We don't get the articles anymore of can women be funny, which was insulting beyond belief. And I'm very proud of that. I think that's fantastic that finally that has been put to bed. And thank you to all the brilliant female comedians who've been leading the way and get up and say that. And we have to say it. But it's over. Yeah. And I think the whole world, I haven't seen that in the last few festivals. I'm sorry that you've told me that it still happens in some places, but I don't see that anymore.
Fewer and fewer places it happens, but you do see it happening. And I do have friends of mine who do clubs, and they say, you can see they turned off when you went on, or you can see them when, the compere goes, the next act is a female comedian, as if it's some sort of,
Well, and I don't think compere should say that.
No, nor do I.
Actually, why do they need to make a point about the gender? They just say, great act coming on. Joe Bloggs could be a man or a woman.
Yeah. I've never seen one go, here comes a non-binary. It's just, they just happen to do,
So, well, I think you might be starting a little campaign here. Do not make a point of the gender of the person walking on.
It doesn't make any sense. It's not relevant to the job, really, like to what they're about to do. Or at least it shouldn't be, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I absolutely, totally agree with that. When I started, when I changed sides, there were very few female artistic directors, and the whole attitude's changed. It's great.
Yeah. There's one thing I'd like to say, just to put to rest a sort of misconception or a potential misconception, is you don't then have a quota of we need to go and see a certain number of females, a certain number of male comedians.
We see everybody.
No, as in to put them forward. So we need to have one person nominated who's a woman, one person who's a man. You don't have that.
I'm delighted to say that women do it on their own merit.
Which I think is better.
And I think that's what they wish to do. Yeah. And I'm delighted to say that we actually have a very good pool of women to choose from. And every year I've looked at the newcomers coming through and seeing how many women. This year, here we are, 2017, there are great slew of new women. There's obviously, I'm talking about ladies, I am talking about just the newcomers at the moment. So there is a lot of very good women. So it's now getting to the place where it should be. Society has changed. We've all helped to change it. And isn't that great? More work to be done,
yeah, of course,
but pretty good.
Do you ever get a level of anxiousness if you're going to announce the nominees and there just are no women in it?
I'd feel anxious. I would definitely feel anxious if there hadn't been enough good women to make it, yes. Because I'd have to look at, who have we been seeing? Why, I think comedy is in an incredibly healthy place now.
Okay.
And I get teased all the time with, so come on then, we had so many years of it, when are we going to have the all-female shortlist? And it's like, when that's how it works out. And that would, of course, really, it would just make me laugh with pleasure. And that is not against any of the men. No, it's just that it would be such a first. And it would be a real... a big clarion call as a statement when you saw that. Because why? Because it would be so remarkable, everyone will be talking about it. And when everyone's talking about the fact that women have actually just smashed it, then it becomes easier. And that's the thing. But in an ideal world, you'd hope you could get 50-50. But we've still got less women doing it. This year, about 20% of the acts across the festival are female. Maybe it might be 25% if I've miscounted, because we have to count them. So, I would hope that 25% of the shortlist could be female then, because that's what it is. It's harder to get an equal shortlist if there aren't the equal numbers of the sexes choosing to do it. Yeah. But the point is, women can choose to do it. They do choose to do it. Please keep on doing it. And please, everybody come and enjoy the fun and pile in if you are very talented and just can think of nothing else more to do than want to make people laugh, because it's hard and you have to be brilliant.
So these are the last quick fire.
Can I just ask you, are you satisfied that I've answered? Are you happy about how the awards are how the awards are run, how they got together, how serious we are about them?
Yeah, I never doubted that, by the way.
I'm just saying, because it's important to discuss it. We're totally transparent.
Yeah, the point of this podcast, of this episode...
Totally transparent about process. We just never give away details, because I don't want people crying.
Yes, I can imagine that's the problem.
This is the whole point of the awards.
So you wouldn't give feedback if someone said, you came to see me, can I have some feedback?
It would depend on who it was, if it was personal rather than my position, and it would be constructive.
Yes.
For me, Edinburgh, I'm an Edinburgh veteran. I've done it myself. I've written, performed and directed and produced here across comedy and drama. And I think there's nowhere like this festival that gives artists of all sorts the opportunity simply to come and do their own work as they want to do it, and see if they are good enough, see if people come, see if people like it. And if they don't, have the hell of a time anyway, because you learn something by that yourself too. But so everything about the awards is about encouragement of the art form of comedy, encouragement for the performers, and taking a very positive spin on every aspect of it, and that's what counts. And we know how it's sensitive. We know that people feel it's real imprimatur and they want to get nominated, and the way we try and make them is to be so thorough and careful. And with so many shows to see, we do now have to use scouts, but they are all former judges that were members of the panel. And these are mostly the members of the public, and also some professionals come back and scout for us, because we have to have people who really know what they're doing. And we feel that everyone who does it feel that the system works. And the judges care that that's true too. And it works, it's thorough. And we have some often surprising results because of that.
Yeah. Well, when it comes down to, because obviously everyone's comedy taste is so subjective themselves. And it's actually, I'm finding more and more intrinsically linked to who they perceive themselves are as well. Because sharing what makes you involuntarily get surprised or get happy is something that, is, especially when you take into account you are accountable for your own happiness. It's such a personal thing. So do you ever have a moment where someone goes, I really like this person, people go, we didn't like that, and they've had to sort of push someone through, or they've had to go, I don't care that you don't like them as a person, or that you think they're whatever, they're funny to me. And so you've had that sort of discourse. Like what's that like when that happens?
There is that. The debates as part of the process are absolutely lively, no holds barred. We always say we're going to do this in civilized fashion, so no one insults anyone else. But it is, and people accept that. Sometimes that's what people go to comedy do a lot, is they go, I know X is brilliant, not my funny bird, not my cup of tea, totally happy that they should be shortlisted. And it's all done on votes. And we're very careful. Again, we meet people, we know the panel before they get, we we found out a lot about them. And we encourage diverse tastes around the table for exactly that. And that's also why the panel is mixed in, it's equal in gender, and we mix up the ages. We always make sure that we have a young people in there. And I was sitting in an audience last couple of days ago and really liked the show. But I also noticed, it was a newcomer, that the 20-somethings in the audience were totally united because the comedian was talking about exactly their time of life and their experience. Now, for someone like me, I've obviously done everything that he's talked about, and so he didn't speak to me as directly, but I saw what was happening with his age group, and also he was very funny. And we take that understanding because the comedy audience will be diverse, and the fact that he was uniting his entire age group said an awful lot to me. So yeah, it is diverse, and we do take that into consideration, and we discuss it at great length. And I watch sometimes a panel member change their mind by the very good arguments of others, and they'll go, "Yeah, I can see that. No, I'll go back and see them again." And they think, "Yeah, got all that." So yeah, lively debate, and it's fascinating to listen to. And I think if comedians could listen to the seriousness and the real sort of detailed debate, they would actually love it, as long as it wasn't their name on the table.
I think if you muted out names, that would be a podcast a lot of people would download.
Yeah, never, because it's not. We have a lot of integrity. We have to do it properly and in a way that process is clear and everyone is considered. But we try where we can not to tread on people's dreams. And
have there been any mistakes along the way that you've learnt from that you would say are something that you now don't do?
Or we think, well, because it's changed, and we changed. We had to decide on the length of time and have a good look at that. We had one of the big things that's been a source of big debate, and it's, I'll talk about it now, because I personally am very fond of that particular part of comedy. But improv, after a while, improv was included in, and then we found it's no longer included in. Why? Because the panel were going and seeing very different shows.
Of course, yeah.
And what happened was, we had one year when there was a very, very strong group of improv troupes shows, and there was a huge amount of debate. We had to keep sending panellists back, because when they discussed the show, they go, "Oh, well, did they do that incredible scene where?" I went, "Nope, didn't happen on my night." We found it impossible to judge. And we have had representations since then from a couple of improv groups saying, we feel we're really upset we're not included, we think we should be included. That is the reason. Comedians can change their show as they go along. They'll drop material and put new material in, but they won't it won't be fundamentally different. Whereas improv, it can be fundamentally different. And that's the one thing that that was changed, for example.
But surely you're judging improv on their ability to play off the audience and keep the thing going, rather than the actual show structure itself.
We do all of that, but sometimes the shows can be so totally different. It's impossible. It's like comparing apples and eggs between the panellists, and we couldn't find a way of doing it. If you had an improv category and you were then judging the troupes as to how good they were as a team on a consistent basis, that you could pick out who was the best team that year, couldn't you? Probably. Though there's always that one night when people just, that I worked with Comedy Store players for ages, and then with Mike McShane and Steen, and there's a magic that happens with a really tight team, just magic. And even though sometimes they don't have such a good night, but I have huge admiration for it. But that was one thing. And the time, how the show should be, another. If anything happens, we learn, and that's what we all should be doing. And we really try our best. And we listen to what people have to say to us. People ring up, they write, they lobby, they put points forward. Everyone's listened to, not always agreed with. But that's all you actually need to. People must have a hearing, mustn't they? An opinion. We all have opinions.
Yeah.
And we do our best to steer our way and make it as fair and clear as possible.
Yeah, and like you said, it comes down to the panel knowing what they're talking about, and the panel being able to justify stuff if they sort of say, well, actually, that person is funny to me. Because obviously, I mean, Richard Gadd's show, for example, it could be that someone found that absolutely hilarious and other people just thought, oh, it's actually a really, really amazing piece of work. And so they have to validate why they think it should win, rather than why they think it's funny or why they think it's whatever.
Yeah, and I'm proud of the fact that, the awards they're not afraid of challenging material. And Richard's an example of that. But the other one, which is, for me, one of the shows I will always remember in Edinburgh, was Adrian Truscott and her One Lady and Her Pussy and Comedy About Rape. And, well, I've never seen a show like that, but also making the points so totally that no means no. And she got the panel prize, Spirit of the Fringe. It was a fantastic show. Challenging material, not for everybody either.
That's what I find interesting. You've got a panel prize that you don't necessarily give away every year, and the other two you definitely do.
Yeah.
So have you ever had a moment where you thought, like, actually there isn't a newcomer that we want to give?
Yeah. Okay, you have inadvertently, yes, no, I know. I got a lot of shtick at the time. I got a lot of shtick. I got laughed at in not the nice laughter kind of way. Was it the right thing to do? I don't know. It felt the right thing at the time. So you can all laugh at me now again and revel in it. So 2008, we brought in the panel prize in 2006, and how we did it was I did a big consultation at the end of 2005, where I sent a questionnaire to all the comedians that had been at the Fringe the year before, asking themselves a range of questions about how the awards were run. It's a proper consultation, and one of them was, do you think there should be a third award? If so, what do you think it should be? Here are some of the things that you've suggested, which was what people were telling me at the time, not enough awards. Sketch, best international. We'd had a little moment where people were going, not fair, someone comes off from Australia, wins the award, and buggers back off to Australia, never gets anything out of it. We got a lot of that after Lane and Woodley won. And, they felt that surely it should be someone who would benefit being here. Well, that's not... It's an international festival, guys, so no, we don't care where they've come from. Mark Watson won it in the first year. So anyway, they couldn't agree what that third award should be. And then loads of suggestions came in and nothing got more than 10%. Well, that's not enough reason. So we decided to create a third award which the panel could choose, which was loose and would actually just reflect a moment of comedy in the Fringe that year. And that's why it was sort of Spirit of the Comedy Award, could be anything. And the first year it was Mark Watson and his very first 24-hour show. And then in 2007 was Arthur Smith and Arthur Art. And then 2008, the panel didn't feel there was anything that was the show. They couldn't find something. So we had to decide whether we didn't award it that year so we sort of didn't really award it because they couldn't find a show that felt right. And so I thought, well, there's £5,000 that, is for this. What do I do with it? So I said, right, we'll give it to all the comics, and we'll give it to all the comics by putting £5,000 behind the bar on the last night of the festival. So it goes down as every comedian on the Fringe. A lot of people had a lot of fun out of that. And the next year, that mischief imp who I adore, Richard Herring, was the one who said, right, I won the panel prize last year. Every comedian won it, so I can put that on my poster. And then quite a lot of people thought, yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, there was just a great joke. And I know it was a metaphorical lobbying of a custard pie in my face, which I have to say I was covered in custard pies by the end of a few weeks. We said, no, please don't do that because it's not fair on the public. You know, please don't. It's not that we value everybody for coming and having a go. And you can't at least say, I didn't give the money back to comics because they did. But there you go. That was a moment. After that, there's someone that every year we felt was that, and the wrestling got it one year, which we love. Karen Corran, who you've done a fantastic podcast. You told lots of lovely stories to us. And Iraq Out and Loud won it last year, which wasn't that just right? Yeah. It was just absolutely right. As was Adrienne Truscott the year that she won it in 2013. So, you know, I think, and yeah.
But there's never been a time where you've thought, there's not a best show, there's not a best newcomer, we just won't give that?
No, never, no. In fact, if anything, it's like it's got to be one person, because I can honestly say that the shortlists are a sort of standard bearer for that year, and it's really, really fantastic. Every shortlist I've gone proud to stand by that. These are great shows. Any member of the audience who buys a ticket to go and see these shows will think they're great shows, even if it's not their funny bone. They should see it's a good show. But occasionally people do go and go, well, I don't see why they found that funny. That's comedy for you. And they may not have found them funny, but I can tell you they were bloody good on the night.
Do you think there's a limit then? So say someone won the 2000 award. Do you think there's a limit for how long they should be allowed to put that on their posters?
No, I think it's a matter of personal taste, and quite often, you know, stars will put all their awards on as a list, and why they put it on here is because that's where they came from, and it's actually marked the festival as well, and it's part of the history. So, you know, you get some comedians now. I mean, how many awards could Steve Coogan put on his list?
Yeah.
You know, and it's part of their history now, and the nominations are part of their history, so it's perfectly valid. And they'll just decide when they feel they've just gone so past it. They might come back and they're playing the Edinburgh Playhouse, that it's time to not mention that anymore because they are now such a star. People come because it's them, and how lovely is that for them?
Definitely. These are the last quick-fire questions. Yes. Who do you think is the most underrated person in the comedy industry?
Oh, I think everyone asks that find it hard to actually put your finger there, just name one person. I think in the context of the awards, the person who schedules the awards, and it is a minefield. It's really tough. Luckily, computers and digital have come along. So for this year, I have to say, Emma Brunges, our wonderful young producer who schedules it, she's totally non-rated because people don't realise it. But I would say to our fantastic scouts who give their holidays, they take the holidays from their jobs to come and see comedy back to back. We had one of our judges actually this year from the public has already seen 90 shows yesterday. No, when I saw him on Tuesday night, and he'd done 90 shows. And he's going for the record, which for comedy stands, I think, at 130 shows for our panel. Wow. And the Scouts are, and a lot of them do Leicester Comedy Festival as well, they're brilliant. And they do love it. They do love comedy, and to each of the comedians I can say they love you, but they're really fabulous.
What do you think is the biggest problem in the comedy industry, and how would you go about solving it?
Here?
Either at the Fringe or in the wider
scope?
Well,
I think the current, right now, the change between print and digital, and for me, I would say something that is affecting all comics and has been desperate this year is not enough proper, good critical reviews written by proper critics who can write, just not enough coverage for the acts. And they need the oxygen of publicity to go forward and to feel that they're taken seriously. And I remember Bo Burnham, when he came, and he was nominated and won the panel prize. He said to me, he said, my God, he said, I've been doing this since I was 14 years old. I have never had the privilege of such erudite, serious, critical reviews in national newspapers. You guys are so, it's just incredible, you guys are so lucky. It's an important part of the process, and we are trying to think about what we can do to help the Scotsman, the papers up here and the national newspapers give more space to comedy and to the whole festival, because we know why, and this is not being cross or anything that the papers are cutting back. Everyone's short of money, it's expensive. So I think we have to think very hard about what I call the crisis in proper critical reviews for comedians, and definitely here, but also even when they're doing their Soho Theatre runs, their London runs, we need to get talked about. Comedians need to get talked about as proper artists and properly reviewed. So I think that's the crisis. And if you talk to the PRs this year, they're going, I can't get anyone because they're really trying. So there you go. That's my thing for this year.
And how would you go about solving it? How would you go about helping it?
Well, we help, and I think the Fringe Society can help too. We should be able to help journalists by providing accommodation. We don't have an agenda. We're not promoting a single comic, just comedy. Yeah. So we're able to be helpful because we exert no influence on what they say or what they think, and we're not interested in doing that because it's the cost of them coming too, and then we have to persuade, and the public can help. Do I feel a little movement coming on here? We need to let the public know. All the comedy people go to comedy, that we want to see our comedians reviewed in the newspapers, and we will read the newspapers to read their reviews. There you go. There's an idea.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
My pleasure.
That was Nica. She is such a comedy nerd. I loved it. I really did. It's always great to hear passion and excitement from behind the scenes, especially something like a competition. I think when you're taking part in a competition, you can often get swept up in the wanting to win it or who's doing better than you, that you forget there are some good people doing their best to offer promotion for the industry as a whole. Thank you so much for Nica for taking part, as well as Anna Arthur for sorting out the interview and for being so cooperative during the Edinburgh Fringe, which is clearly their most busy time of the year, so I can't thank you enough for doing that, as well as a listener and fan of the podcast who was on the Edinburgh panel, who originally helped sort this out and put me in contact with Anna and Nica, Steve Morton. Thank you very much for all your help. I couldn't have done this without you, so sincerely thank you for all of the cooperation and help that you guys did to support the show. As far as I know, this was actually Nica's first podcast, so it's an exclusive, which is quite nice. If you enjoyed this, please do share it with someone who you think will get some value out of it, or you can tweet Nica to say thank you. It's always really helpful to the show because it shows the guest that there are people listening and appreciating the subjects we're talking about, and it means that when I approach them, or if I do approach them and ask them for introductions to other people, they go, oh yeah, I had a great time on that. Some people tweeted me, they listened to it, I'll introduce them to other people, which it helps me get bigger and better guests. So if you have enjoyed it and you sincerely want to say thank you to her, please do. It doesn't take long and it's immeasurably helpful to the show. Quick plugs. I'm going to Ireland from the 10th of October 2017 for 2 weeks to do shows in Galway, Cork, Dublin and Bray. If you live near any of those places, please come. I'm bringing Laughter is the Best Placebo to Ireland and I can't wait. And I'm also doing some spots in different clubs. All the details are on my website, which is simoncaine.co.uk. If you're new here, please do hit the subscribe button. If you're old here, please do consider giving us an honest review in iTunes. And either way, if you'd like to give a donation just to keep the show going, this show lives or dies on donations and the support of the community of the listeners. So if you have £1 to say thank you for this episode, just £1, I'd massively appreciate it. If everyone did it, we would be somewhere towards breaking even. So if you can't afford it, don't donate. If you can spare £1 and it's just sitting in your PayPal doing nothing, send it my way. I would really appreciate it. At simoncaine.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for donating. And thank you very much for sharing if you do. The Ask the Industry podcast is a Fruit That Got in Gravity's Way production for the internet. All elements were created by me, comedian Simon Caine. If you'd like to contact me about anything related to the show, you can tweet me at thismademecool or email me simon.m.caine@gmail.com. and I'll see you all in about 14 days' time. Bye!